Everybody, we have the pleasure of hearing Jake Klarner speak about his senior project today. It, of course, I guess, is on architecture. We've known that Jake had that passion since he walked in the door as an 8th grader. And here we are. Today, Jake's going to tell us a little bit about that history, and then he's going to share more specifically about visualizing architecture and how he and other architects in the field do that on paper and 3D and virtually 2D and 3D. So, please welcome Jake.
Architecture, as many of you may know, is the process of designing and building the structures around us. But that's not the entire part of architecture. Another part can include creating useful spaces that are also places to look at. This can be through different structures like buildings and also the design of the park. But the main idea of creating a good structure is creating a dynamic structure that can sustainably change over time. Similar to many new architects of our generation, I played a lot of Minecraft as a kid. Minecraft allowed me to creatively explore different building ideas, as well as experiment with floor planning and landscaping. Although I did not know at the time, this was one of my first introductions to actual architecture. My original hole in the side of the hill houses, which I never blew up with TNT, gradually became better planned buildings that grew outside of the hills. As the game developed, so did I. I began considering different color palettes, textures, and the scale of buildings relative to the other structures around them. However, by age 12, I realized that both Minecraft and my skills had developed enough for me to go through my world and revitalize all buildings. I went through adding different roofing heights, textures, and just making the buildings a little bit more polished. Over the past 5 years at VNS, I have done 9 different architecture and design related projects. All of this has led to me developing a wide knowledge of architecture. From my first project on Frank Lloyd Wright, which introduced me to digital design, to my project from last year, a 200-hour study on Revit.
We're going to adjust. Really close to your mouth. How's that?
How's that?
Everybody hear him better? Go ahead, say something.
Hi.
Yes. Is that better? You're just a lot taller. Okay. Try that.
Hi. All this has led to me developing a large architectural knowledge from my first project with Frank Lloyd Wright, which introduced me to digital design, as well as my project last year, a 200-hour study on Revit. On top of this, my senior project will round off from architecture-related projects to a nice even 10. I prepared my project since the summer before my junior year. And although I had to restructure it at the end of last year, I still think it turned out well. At first, my plan was going to be to design and build a house for my mom. And we did actually buy a lot and start this process. But after a while, we realized we had to scale it down a little bit. So we found a different lot and actually went through and created a full plan you can see on the screen there. But eventually, the prices still kept rising because of COVID, and it was too expensive to justify building a house. Thus, I had to rethink my senior project. Over the summer, while attending Illinois Institute of Technology's Experiment with Architecture, I worked on creating different models through different structures and also learning a 3D modeling software. While working on this, I came to the conclusion that the design process is just as important as final structure. Poor design can lead to boring suburbs that lack character and buildings that have flaws that impact actual use. Additionally, creating more structures that are cheaply built and can cause repetitive maintenance. Additionally, being able to visualize the final design is equally as important for the architect as it is for the client. Creating a poor design will impact the use of the final structure. It is oftentimes very difficult for the clients to actually visualize how the plan will look from a 2D perspective, and that's where 3D modeling comes in handy. In my senior project, I wanted to cover how the role architecture plays in their everyday lives, including the ways I may not notice. How the introduction of digital modeling has allowed the ability to change and visualize buildings in just a matter of minutes, and how contemporary architecture must sustainably change and evolve throughout time. Through my research, I have found different images in how visualizing architecture is key to a strong finished design, as well as creating an efficient creative process. A good example of the way humans interact with architecture and can fit into the landscape and how high-rise can positively add to a city's skyline. Over the past decades, this has become an important question to think about as humans develop their knowledge of how they interact with architecture. One of the most interesting parts of my process was a book that I had given to me in my internship called Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. And although this is a bit of an older book written in the 1980s, and some of the places no longer exist, I still found it relevant to use this information. For instance, in 1961, New York instituted an incentive for builders to create more public spaces. For every 10 square feet of public space that they added, the city would allow another 100 square feet of actual building. Therefore, this allowed buildings to grow much larger than previously allowed. And designers definitely took advantage of this, creating much larger and much taller buildings. But on the bright side, this allowed more space for public use. Unfortunately, sometimes owners would take advantage of this and would incorporate these plazas in the building, but once the building was completed, they would close them off to the public and not allow access. Oftentimes, this is hard for the city to actually enforce because of how many buildings they already have to manage. And this is also oftentimes happening in apartment buildings and office buildings where the plazas are very maintained and designed. On buildings that did allow public access, however, interesting things were found among the users. A group of interviewers went around asking questions and what their person's ideal place would be to relax. Oftentimes, they get words like oasis, escape, and retreat. I also spent time observing and found people oftentimes had conversations in or near the main flow of traffic, often causing people to travel around them. It was also found that people like to sit in the main areas, such as sitting on the steps at the entrance to a building or along the ledge along the sidewalk. To help accommodate this, designers began adding some more seating around the main paths of travel. One of the best ways that both look nice and is functional is retaining walls. Retaining walls are a great example of how to use seating here without the need to add a bench. This can be especially useful when designing on a sloping site. For example, when influential architect Louis Van Roo designed the Seagram building, pictured on the screen here, he was surprised with this exact situation. Because of the way he designed the plaza, none of the ledges have railings to block people from sitting on them. As well as following his style, he did not have much shrubbery or ornamentation to block people from sitting down. As a result, most people would end up sitting around on the plaza's different ledges. Another way to meet the human need for seating is to add something less permanent. Chairs are definitely a good form of seating because they allow the people to move around. And they're also more comfortable. Studies also found that plazas oftentimes don't include chairs because the developers are worried about them being stolen or being expensive to replace. But it is found that it's very rare that chairs end up being stolen. For example, in Bryant Park in New York City, 400 chairs require maintenance and repair over a year. But only about 6 to 8 are stolen, of the 2,000 that are on the park. This is just the surface of the human dynamic when it comes to gathering and relaxing the book covered. Incidentally, they also show how the impact that people can go in, how in-depth people can go in when researching zoning codes in a large city with the probability to spend just hours researching plaza regulations and incentives. This is only part of the design process. Making sure that the client is happy can also be very challenging. The best way to ensure that clients will be happy is to evolve within the design process. Several different methods of visualization do exist in this process, and each come with both pros and cons. In the field of architecture, drawing plans out by hand has been the norm since the career first started. when manually drafting, it is found that designers will end up being a lot more creative and genuine in their designs. Manual drafting also costs less because it requires less expensive materials compared to drafting on CAD. For example, when drafting on CAD, you have to buy a high-end computer and the expensive CAD subscription every single year. Drawing in CAD can also be helpful to make the final version look a lot more high quality. It also has a lower margin of error between plans compared to manual drafting. It is also a lot easier to share projects between designers that only have the ability to quickly send them back and forth. This is especially apparent over long distances and collaboration between firms. Additionally, when using CAD, it is a lot easier to keep the plans for future reference among people in the company. And it is also a lot easier to just redraw a plan rather than having to completely redraw the entire plan or make one small changes and send it back to the contractor. So let's talk about our own experiences with drafting. 2 weeks ago, I led an all-school advisory where we worked on a plan for the future of ENS. Keep in mind that this location is only meant to be used to gather ideas for the future of ENS and is not official. So, first, on the left, you can see it is drawn on AutoCAD, and the one on the right is on paper. I offered it two different ways to help see the different versions of actually drafting. So I had you guys make edits, and which method, and to use different methods. So how many of you guys use AutoCAD? And then how many of you use paper? Which methods of visualization do you prefer, and why? Feel free to raise your hand there. Yeah.
Paper, because it was easier. Paper, because it was fun.
Anyone else?
AutoCAD, because I could organize my layers better.
Did anyone notice anything they enjoyed or not enjoyed about the process about thinking about how the spaces will be used in the future?
I noticed some groups having difficulty fitting all the workstations in, and trying to have a way to walk around the outside, which was challenging for some people, I think.
Does anyone see any challenges they foresee in the future of ENS at all?
Maybe being able to see students when there's like rooms covering it.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
We're all probably gonna be fighting over the window seats. I don't know. I have a personal question.
So some of you guys had great ideas for the future of ENS. Is there any examples you want to share?
Koi pond. I mean,
I know it's not depicted on this specific one, but it would be great to turn that front window space into a green room, like a greenhouse.
Having individual rooms for students to work that are like specifically made for anything.
Okay, great. So, ENS is a great example of how repurposing a space for a new use is done. When we oftentimes think of architecture, we think of a fixed structure that doesn't really even change. But in reality, oftentimes all buildings are continuously changing, whether it's in the spaces inside of them or around them. Growing understanding of how buildings will change over time and as well as initially designing them to be adaptable is an important part of the building's growth. Buildings must exist within an environment that will change, therefore buildings must sustainably change with their surroundings, while also creating a less wasteful construction process. Making an unfinished building at first may seem like a bad idea. It is a good way to use open design. Open design is when a building is not unfinished, but rather seen as a framework to be filled in by the user. A good example of an unfinished building is the Diagon buildings in Delphi in the Netherlands. This was designed by Herman Hertzberger, shown here on the screen. They were created by using internal balconies and terraces, working together to give the feeling that the building is only completed by the occupant, allowing the spaces to be more flexible. And in the book How Buildings Learn, the author Stuart Bann talks about how architecture should not be viewed as permanent, but rather as an ever-changing process. At the end of the book, he talks about a tool he developed called scenario planning. He discussed the idea of a scenario buffer building that can develop over time to be used in different situations. Large buildings are often designed to show the process of technology. They oftentimes use large amounts of stone, glass, steel, and concrete to create them. This becomes more apparent as the need for housing for the growing population increases. Over the next 4 decades, the amount of square footage added each month to the Earth will be equal to the size of New York. All these buildings will require large amounts of stone, glass, and other raw materials. Unfortunately, raw materials are the main cause of 40% of the world's climate emissions, half of which come just from new construction. On top of this, the creation of cement alone is 8% of all global emissions. In the 1960s, MIT researchers developed a simulation dubbed World 3. The idea was to visualize the long-term consequences of population growth, industrialization, and the use of natural resources. In the 1972 book, The Limits to Growth, the authors discussed how unless humankind changed the way they use natural materials on a global scale, civilization would likely collapse by 2070. As the complex nature of the materials increased in the early 20th century, the oil and gas industry began introducing chemical byproducts in the refining process. Oftentimes, creating things such as plastic polymers, insulation, varnishes, sealants, pipings, pigments, and fireproofing materials. Since they created these technologies, they actually wanted to use them. Industry ended up lobbying the state local building codes, as well as incentivizing architects to start using these new high-end materials. As the design of these new buildings grew, the gas industry began continued coating everything in these new oil and gas derivatives, rendering it almost impossible to separate the natural materials from the additives. This was because of their ability to seep into small fibers of the wood, creating it very hard to separate the two materials. And although this may sound bad, and not saying that it's not, it is important for architects to remember that in modern day design, they must acknowledge how the structure will change over time and considering the sustainability of the way that it's designed. It is important for designers to remember that eventually most buildings will be demolished, and having the ability to easily disassemble or recycle is especially important. For example, in the Netherlands, a timber skyscraper is being built, and it shows how different technologies can help develop a more sustainable way of construction.
Towering 85 meters above the Norwegian countryside, Mjøstårnet cuts a sleek shape in the rural skyline. Housing 18 stories of restaurants, apartments, and hotel rooms, this modern building might seem out of place, but a deeper look reveals it actually blends in quite well among the forested farmlands. This is likely because Mjøstårnet is the world's tallest wooden building, made almost entirely from the trees of neighboring forests. Until the end of the 20th century, engineers thought it was impossible to build a wooden building over 6 stories tall. Traditional boards of lumber were fairly strong against forces parallel to the wood's fiber growth, but they were vulnerable to forces applied perpendicular to this direction. As a result, wood lacked steel's tensile strength, or concrete's compressive strength, each necessary to support tall buildings and battle the powerful winds found at high altitudes. But the early 1890s saw the invention of glue-laminated timber, or glulam, and a century later, engineers developed cross-laminated timber, or CLT. These new wooden materials start out like all other lumber. A freshly cut log is sawed into smooth, uniform boards of wood. Then, in the case of CLT, the boards are glued together in alternating orientations, with each layer set at 90 degrees to its neighbors. The resulting material benefits from wood's structural rigidity in every direction, allowing it to mimic the compressive strength of concrete and bear loads up to 20 times heavier than traditional lumber. Glulam, on the other hand, glues boards together in the same direction, forming massive beams with tensile strength comparable to steel. Glulam isn't as versatile as CLT, but its incredible strength along one direction makes it superior for load-bearing beams and columns. These engineered forms of wood could finally compete with traditional materials, while also bringing their own unique set of advantages. At 1/5 the weight of concrete, building with CLT requires smaller cranes, smaller foundations, and fewer construction workers. While concrete has to undergo a time-intensive process of casting and curing in a mold, timber can be shaped quickly using computer-directed cutting machines. And where concrete requires certain weather and timing conditions to be poured on site, engineered wood can be prefabricated in a factory, creating standardized parts with clear instructions for assembly. Taken together, these materials allow for faster and quieter construction, with more biodegradable materials and less waste. Once constructed, CLT and Glulam buildings are also more resilient to some natural disasters. An earthquake can crack concrete, permanently weakening an entire structure, but cracked wood panels can be easily replaced. The same is true for fire safety. As temperatures rise in a CLT building, the material's outer layer will char, insulating the inner layers for up to 3 hours. This is more than enough time to evacuate most buildings, and once the smoke is settled, charred panels can be swapped out, unlike melted steel beams.
As you can see, this not only will help the process of construction, but it also help the lifespan of the building with easy repairs and maintenance, but also create not a lot of waste. And we'll also talk in the video, the construction process will also create less waste and be able to reuse the timber that was used during the construction. As design develops, architects will continue to become more aware of the need that people have to gather. History shows that people will always have the need to be together, and the process of design needs to reflect on it and balance the need for privacy. Throughout time, architects have managed to find the balance between the form and creativity, while also being able to visualize the space's function and how it will be used. In the end, the way that buildings will change over time make it necessary for a design building to be flexible. Whether it's an office space or a store, most places will not remain the same their entire life. The same goes for humans, and for me specifically, after VNS, I'll continue my internship in landscape architecture at Van Dyke Company until I attend Illinois Institute of Technology. In the fall, to pursue a degree in architecture. I hope that one day design buildings that follow in the principles of innovative design that I studied this year. And finally, I'd like to thank the advisors, Ms. Kay, my parents, Van Dyke Company, and anyone else I've worked with along the way. And I look forward to seeing how VNS will continue to develop into a new space. Thank you.
So did you ever tour the Frank Lloyd Wright estate or any of his buildings?
Yeah, I've been to most Frank Lloyd Wright houses nearby. Taliesin.
Yeah.
I do enjoy how the process of this went. I do think that'd be fun to add more, like, I wanted to do like create a VR walkthrough, sort of like showing that, but I didn't get time to do that, so.
What's your favorite thing that you did get to do in this project?
It's really fun creating the models. It's really, because when you make like on AutoCAD, you get like a good idea of how it'll look. We're actually bringing like into like actual like into like real life. It makes it a lot more realistic. So you can sort of see like over there. Yeah.
Advice for future seniors.
Future seniors. I really enjoyed having a calendar I created. Every like 6 weeks I make like a full calendar, and like mid-year I made a calendar like all the way to the end of the year just to help make sure I have everything done on time. So that's really helpful. Yeah.
During any of your projects on architecture, did you learn anything about hostile architecture? And if you did, could you give your thoughts or any like interesting information you know?
Like fearless architecture.
That works too, but by hostile I meant like when people make like anti-homeless benches or
yeah.
such, you know?
I didn't really do too much with that really. I mean, it's obviously always going to be around because people want like the buildings to look a certain way. But the idea of it is not like the best. They can obviously find better ways to do different ways of designing that.
What is your favorite Minecraft build that you've done?
My favorite Minecraft build. I've created so many things, it's hard to say, but I don't really have any pictures, but I did create like this one really big house. It was like mid-century modern. I really enjoyed it. Eliza?
I don't know if you mentioned this, but how did you take notes?
Oh, so I use note cards. I really enjoy using note cards. I have a stack about 300. I had to use a rubber band to hold them all together, and it broke a couple of times. But I just really find it really easy to lay them all on my desk and make sure that I have all of them and I'm able to easily organize them.
What are some of the most effective, eco-friendly designs that you know of, or like strategies for building?
Well, getting a building LEED certified, I don't remember the exact acronym, but it's like making sure a building has like uses like solar, regenerative energy, gray water recycling, which is basically just like using like the water that comes out through the sinks. Obviously, you don't use the toilet water or anything, but like dishwasher water, stuff that has like soap in it, and then filtering it. You can use like water lines and different things like that, and have like correct insulation for building as well. Yeah.
Favorite design style?
I really like mid-century modern. Sort of seeing like in frame quite right. My first picture on my slides. It's I can go back. It's sort of like like this is like sort of mid-century, like you know, you can sort of tell by some of the buildings I have on here. Grizzle?
What was the most challenging part of the project?
The most challenging part was I really don't know. I should have prepared for this one. It's probably creating a model, just trying to get all of the roof trusses lined up and making sure that it doesn't fall apart.
Do you think other architects will do enough to help with climate change?
Some architects will definitely do like focus on climate change, but some like old architects might not be as aware of it, or they'll avoid the idea of it, as you say. But I'm hoping that like future generations, with like social media and all different forms of spreading the word, will definitely be more aware of it.
What was your favorite part of this project?
My favorite part of the project, creating the models was definitely my favorite. Making sure they just need all come together.
What level of math is typically involved in creating architectural models?
In creating models, as much as like actually
Planning in general.
Oh, planning in general. I know in college you have to take like the first level of calculus, but it's hard to say like right now. But the architect does some math, but the structural engineer definitely does a lot more complicated stuff when it comes to that.
Favorite and least favorite part of the design process?
Of the design process, definitely trying to start the actual plan is definitely like the hardest part, especially if you don't have like any restrictions at all. Just trying to get like, an idea of what you want to actually do. But the easiest part is definitely like around the middle where you have like a good idea, but you're able to type it in and show like what you're thinking.
How do you feel this project differs from your other architectural basic projects?
This project, So last year I did something similar to this, just focusing on one smaller thing, but this one is definitely like a lot more informative and research based, having like reaching out, like looking at different parts of architecture rather than focusing on like a single aspect and how they all connect together.
Do you plan on designing a house for yourself one day, and if so, how would you like to design it?
I would like to design my house for myself. Although it's hard to say right now what I would like in the future, but right now it'd be really cool to have like a mid-century house, something like that.
Did you touch much into like interior design, like based on like coloring and like furniture and that kind of stuff?
I have done previous projects, something similar to like interior design, but I didn't do too much of this. And like interior design, like certain colors make them feel certain ways. I know red, for example, like having bright red in your room is very bad because it makes your stimulates your brain more. It's hard to relax. But the actual design is like I did more exterior focus. True.
What's your favorite building?
My favorite building? Falling Water is really nice. Farnsworth House, love that house so much. It's designed by me, down the road. I showed one of his buildings earlier, but it's a lot more of a tame kind of house, I guess you could say. It sort of shows like it's glass all the way around, and it looks like two floating slabs. And it's really cool to see from a distance. This one.
I was not here the morning that you did the advisory activity, and while we heard from a few of the students about what they thought best for the next BNS space, I'm curious what you took away from that activity and analyzing all of the responses that you've heard, and what you think out of that would be a great use for the BNS space.
Well, it's hard to say right now how to use the space exactly without
Fair enough.
having a correct, like a specific space
Pretend
right
it's
now.
gonna be that space.
But if I can go back to that one slide. So getting the ideas, it was definitely like helpful to see like that's other students' perspective from what I've seen. So I don't use all the spaces in the school right now, but like making sure like certain like the music room, for example, is in a space that's not near another really loud, or like making sure that there's like enough desk area or like specific like meeting rooms and adding like the ability to move around in different spaces. Caitlin?
It's me again. Opinion on tiny houses.
Tiny houses. They're definitely acquired taste. I do take respect for people that do live in them because it does take a lot of work. Having to minimize everything and making sure you don't have access. So the idea of them is good. I know most people probably won't work for them, which is where like larger houses come in, but tiny houses are cool because you have the ability to move around and find different areas you want to play and experiment different places.
What is the worst building? Bonus points if you've got pictures.
The worst building is definitely like, I like to look at older buildings, but the efficiency of them is really bad for the environment, especially with old glass windows and making like, because they're a lot more leaky, which requires a lot more energy. And they're also a lot heavier on maintenance and maintenance of that. But as for like design, it's hard to say because there's so many buildings in the world. There's some of those really weird buildings I honestly see. And some people don't like them, some people do. It's really a matter of like your own opinion.
The best and worst places you can think of to like design a house for.
Designing in a big city is very challenging, especially with all different regulations and requirements. Like I looked in just like zoning codes and for plazas in New York City, and I have about 50 note cards just filled with different information about it. Let alone have like everything else that comes in play with engineering and making sure like you work around all of the existing buildings and just like trying to manage trying to way actually get the construction materials into the city and around is a challenge.
Would you rather design commercial buildings or residential?
I get asked a lot if I want to design commercial or residential buildings. Commercial buildings are definitely going to be a lot more like freedom when it comes to it, because residential buildings, it depends where you are, but you're definitely working a lot closer with the client, and you might not do exactly what you want to do with it, like commercial buildings, you're able to do a lot more. Like for example, if you create a high rise, you can like, a lot more freedom with that. You get spaces and really inside of it. That's it.
Would you be paid more for, what would you be paid more for, would you, a residential or?
It's hard to say. A lot of times you get paid the most, you actually do both. But it depends like what's like the area of commercial you're in. Because if you're doing like high-end commercial, you can obviously make a lot of money, like designing these huge houses you would see like in California. But commercial architecture can also be paid a lot because you're working for big companies that have a lot of money to spend. But it just depends what you're working on, I guess.
How do you follow trends?
Following trends come in and out of style really fast, and it is necessarily not the best idea to use them as a way to design, especially because buildings are going to be around a lot longer than the trend exists, which is why you see like, all these like, houses in like, the 70s, 80s that are like, really in style at the time, but then you see them now that are like really dated or run down. But so like designing what you like is the main idea of architecture, and you can pretty much design like these like trend that you want, but using them as like an idea is a good way to start every time. So,
What would be your ideal climate to design for?
an ideal climate to design for would be, I feel like lower than Wisconsin, but like above like the like tornado alley, because you got like a lot more like obviously you're gonna get a lot more construction like they're not gonna be destroyed, but
Yeah.
like having like the Midwest, like lower Midwest is a good place because you don't have a lot of like natural disasters, but also not to worry like earthquakes or like hurricanes or anything like that. So
A little bit about Sims, if you could design a building anywhere in the world, where would you want to design a building, like have it built there?
I would love to design like a building like Netherlands would be really cool because they have a lot of like experimental architecture there. Denmark, Germany, because you always notice like all these like really cool houses are always out like in the east, where like on the west it's a lot more like fixed because they have a lot more regulations and things in design. So
What is your opinion on high-tech houses?
high-tech houses, they're really cool to a point where they become kind of creepy. Like video doorbells are a great idea, like because you're able to like be safe, a lot more safer when you get open your door to a random person. But also like creating energy efficient like windows is also really helpful. I know some colleges have started using like big like automated blinds that like track the sun, so they'll help keep energy costs down when you're cooling the building. But like creating things that like automatic, like creating an oven that automatically turns on and off is kind of pointless to a fact that you better use it like one time. It's kind of a waste of money. Cool.
What's your dream house?
My dream house, it would definitely be like a mix of like mid-century like classic suburban, I guess you could say. Kind of like mixing it together to create a house that's a little unique compared to like other houses around it.
So Jack, I think, asked about the trends and how you keep track of trends. I'm wondering, on the other side, are there any design aspects that are timeless?
Timeless design aspects, I definitely have to look into that more, but I know like things like creating like large windows obviously has been like around for a long time to let in natural light. But it's hard to say. I know like earth tones probably be around for a while, you always see them around, because they're like unusuals and in different ways. But it's hard, it's really hard because like trends come in and out, and they're always so different when it comes to the design process.
Limitations of coastal housing and houses.
Coastal housing, there's only so much coastline in the world, but obviously, as they develop and like tsunamis come around, it's not the best, but obviously because they get wiped out a lot easier. And with like sea rise, it's obviously going to be a lot more devastating to them as the coast comes in. You're gonna have to find another house, but designing a way to make sure like make it so like houses possibly like could float above or something, like creating a community that's on the water would be really cool to see happen. And like the Farnsworth house, they were talking about like putting like automated lifts in it because it gets flooded because it's right on the river. So having a way to design around like water is what would be really helpful. Isaac?
What is your least favorite style of architecture?
My least favorite style of architecture? I feel like really like basic suburban houses can be like a turn off because it's just like cookie cutter neighborhoods. Like you go through there, like every single house looks the same, and
Sorry.
every single house like looks exactly the same. So like you're going through there, like what house is my house? Or you need to find ways like
I know what you're talking about.
or like you somehow like you come home late and then you're walking into my house. Yeah.
I didn't really specify last time I asked, but how much would rent be per month in LA with that tiny house?
Rent, I'm assuming it's probably about a couple $100 a square foot, and that house is 1,100 square feet. Probably about, what? Well, a standalone house, I'm assuming would probably be like $5,000–6,000. I know a house in, like, I think it was Los Angeles, that sold for like $2 million of like 500 square feet, and yeah.
Okay, so I think what she was trying to ask there was like, if that exact size
Oh, that
house,
exact size
that
house?
exact
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
model was in LA,
Oh,
how much rent would we have to have that model?
So the base itself, you're gonna go off like the area of the base, okay? So it's 2 feet by about 3 feet. So that's gonna be about 6 square feet. Multiply that by about, I'd say like $500 a square foot. That's gonna be mental math, expensive, yeah.
It's like $3,000.
Jake, could you share a little bit about the process of that particular model that you built
Yeah.
this year? How, beginning to end, how long did it take, all that?
Well, first I went on AutoCAD and created a whole design, elevation views and all the different necessary parts of that. And then me and my dad went through, he got a pallet from his work, so we all cut down like 1/2 inch thick by 4 inch rectangles. And then cut them down on a table saw, so they're 1/4 inch thick. And then we went through, then we created different like molds, like, so we could easily replicate like the roofing or using like spacers to usually make sure that all the walls are the correct distance apart. But we used a lot of nails, a lot of glue. We used 996 nails, and then we used 3 different types of glue: hot glue, wood glue, and E6000, which is industrial strength glue that like turns into rubber. But then you can sort of see it just some plywood, not plywood, but like this balsa wood on top that we cut to hold the roof trusses together so they don't fall over when transporting it around. Yeah, that's pretty much what we did.
Your utilization of our makerspace, not necessarily just for this project, but in general.
I haven't really used the makerspace too much because I've been around for really long. I built that in my dad's garage, just because it takes so much space and it's pretty messy. But the makerspace I definitely think is a helpful space to have if you're trying to experiment with new things and create, like for example, like the 3D printer. I know colleges are just like starting to implement that for design. But I'm going to itself, we have, I think it has like 6 3D printers we got a couple of weeks ago. And that, but it's really helpful to have a tool like that before you go to college and you can know how to use them, like show off to people.
So when like planning buildings and stuff like that, does the architect have to be the one that is concerned with, I guess, the properties of whatever materials they're planning on using? So like different kinds of wood are better for this kind of like environment or whatever. Does the architect have to be the one to know that, or would the engineer be more involved?
Well, obviously the architect's gonna have to know that, but a lot of the more in-depth parts of that are gonna go towards like the civil engineer, and they're gonna work together to make sure the plan is structural. The architect is gonna go through it and show like where everything should go, but the civil engineer is definitely like a firm that's gonna work and make sure it's correct.
So you would like pick specifically, like, you said also?
Yes, also, you would actually use that because it's a really flimsy wood, but like,
Oh, okay.
you'd use like plywood or something, like you pick out most of the like materials you want to use in that process.
All right, thanks, everybody. You have about 10 minutes to wrap up your work for the day. Make sure that you've jotted down your notes or any information after. Log your day.